When Sandra Bullock was insulted, Keanu Reeves' response changed everything in a single moment of cruelty. A Hollywood power broker thought he could destroy a beloved actress in front of her peers, but he had no idea that his vicious attack would trigger a reckoning that would bring down his entire empire of fear. What happened next proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply refusing to let it stand unchallenged. The grand ballroom sparkled with camera flashes and manufactured grins, one of those evenings where image mattered more than substance. But when someone delivered a vicious attack on Sandra Bullock's dignity, the atmosphere transformed. She smiled graciously, attempting to mask the pain, and then Keanu Reeves moved closer. His response wasn't dramatic, but it revolutionized everything. Before we dive deeper, share with us, what quality do you most admire about Keanu Reeves? The Beverly Hills Hotel radiates beneath the amber glow of March 2019, its refined corridors alive with hushed exchanges and strategic chuckles. This evening marks the exclusive Golden Circle Awards ceremony, an event so selective that only Hollywood's elite inner circle receives entry. Photographers document every instant, journalists move subtly through the crowd, and celebrities showcase their most dazzling facades. Yet this is far from an ordinary evening in the entertainment capital. Tonight, three destinies will intersect in an instant that will reshape bravery, honor, and the authentic essence of integrity in Hollywood. Sandra Bullock glides into the primary reception hall, stunning in an ebony silk gown, embracing associates with that authentic warmth that has earned her universal adoration. At 54, her journey exemplifies raw talent, Academy Award recipient, box office champion, and crucially, honored by peers and audiences alike. She navigates the space with effortless elegance, pausing to engage with emerging directors, offering guidance and anecdotes with the generosity that defines her character. Across the sophisticated ballroom, Keanu Reeves arrives with his signature understated presence, no theatrics, no effective ceremony. At 54, he has evolved beyond a cinematic icon into Hollywood's final gentleman. Tales of his compassion flow through the industry like modern folklore, subway journeys with ordinary admirers, substantial gratuities for production crews, never speaking negatively about fellow performers. His demeanor remains serene, watchful, almost contemplative. Tonight, none suspect that these two kind spirits will become linked through an incident that will resonate throughout Hollywood for years. Also attending is Marcus Wellington, 52, among the West Coast's most influential and merciless studio moguls. With immaculately groomed silver hair and piercing blue eyes that observe everything, Marcus constructed his domain through calculated intimidation and strategic career annihilation. He doesn't merely approve projects, he controls fates, shapes, trajectories, and destroys aspirations with the indifference of someone discarding yesterday's headlines. Marcus embodies Hollywood's establishment men who believe authority grants them license to degrade anyone they view as defenseless. His reputation includes brutal evaluation sessions that leave veteran professionals doubting their abilities, and his specific contempt for performers he deems beyond their peak. The ceremony commences predictably, rehearsed humor, anticipated speeches, and that familiar veneer of artificial fellowship that characterizes these gatherings. Celebrities pretend enthusiasm for each other's achievements while exchanging spiteful whispers during intermissions. However, something unusual permeates the air tonight, a tension transcending typical rivalry, as if fate itself prepares for an incident that would define not merely two careers, but the very essence of an entire industry. Sandra converses enthusiastically with emerging filmmakers near the refreshment area, sharing insights about Hollywood navigation with infectious passion that makes everyone feel they're receiving invaluable wisdom. Her genuine laughter creates warmth amid the evening's artificiality, Marcus observes from across the room, his gaze narrowing with predatory intensity that everyone in Hollywood has learned to dread. Tonight he harbors an agenda, one involving publicly reinforcing everyone about Hollywood's hierarchy. Sandra Bullock, successful, beloved, and aging, represents everything he believes requires correction. He adjusts his costly cufflinks like preparing weapons, speaking quietly to his 8 about reminding certain people of their industry position. What Marcus fails to realize is that Keanu Reeves watches from across the space. And when Keanu witnesses injustice, he doesn't merely observe, he intervenes. The evening progresses with familiar patterns, awards distributed, speeches delivered, networking conducted with practiced efficiency. Yet beneath the surface glamour, tensions build toward something unprecedented. As guests circulate between conversations, 3 separate universes approach collision. Sandra's authentic kindness will face testing, Marcus's deliberate cruelty will be revealed, and Keanu will demonstrate why certain individuals become legends not for their accomplishments but for their choices when no one watches. The stage is prepared for a confrontation that will challenge Hollywood's power structure foundations. What begins as a celebration will become a defining moment of moral bravery, a reckoning. Years in development. Tonight, a single exchange will prove that sometimes the most crucial battles aren't fought with violence or political manipulation, but with steadfast dignity and moral clarity. Sometimes the most effective response to cruelty is simply refusing to let it remain unchallenged. The atmosphere intensifies as night advances, each conversation and interaction building toward something unpredictable yet palpable. The magnificent ballroom, with its crystal lighting and marble surfaces, becomes a stage for something far more meaningful than any awards ceremony. Among the designer formal wear and perfect smiles, 3 contrasting approaches to power and humanity prepare to collide in ways that will compel everyone present to examine their own moral courage and participation in abusive systems. As the evening unfolds and these 3 influential personalities move toward their inevitable intersection, none realize they're about to participate in something that will be remembered, analyzed, and discussed for years ahead. What begins as Marcus's calculated attempt to humiliate Sandra will transform into a moment that exposes Hollywood's toxic power underbelly, challenges everyone present to examine their moral courage, and proves that sometimes one person's willingness to stand up can ignite a revolution. The ceremony reached its crescendo when Marcus Wellington chose to execute his strategy. The timing was precisely calculated during the reception period when official cameras paused momentarily, but countless mobile devices still documented every interaction. Sandra was immersed in animated discussion with 3 young filmmakers, recounting early career challenges with infectious enthusiasm that made everyone around her feel motivated. Her laughter resonated through the elegant space, creating waves of authentic joy amid the manufactured charm typically characterizing these events. Precisely then, Marcus approached, his expensive Italian shoes striking marble floors with deliberate rhythm. Sandra Bullock, Marcus's voice sliced through the conversation like a blade disguised in false politeness. His smile was frigid, calculating, utterly predatory. Well, still making your rounds, I see. Though I must question why. The group surrounding Sandra immediately fell silent, as if someone had suddenly extracted all oxygen from their vicinity. Nearby table conversations noticeably dimmed, curious stares beginning to focus on this clearly developing scene. Sandra blinked, genuinely perplexed by the loaded remark and aggressive undertone. I'm sorry, Marcus. I don't understand your meaning. Marcus's laughter was brutal and dismissive, a sound that made several people physically uncomfortable. Oh, Sandra. Always so wonderfully naive. I'm discussing reality, sweetheart, about recognizing when your moment has passed. The assault was surgical in precision. Marcus had selected the most vulnerable aspect of any aging actress in Hollywood relevance and marketability and weaponized it for maximum public humiliation. Every word was carefully chosen to undermine her professional standing while maintaining industry honesty pretense. Sandra felt her face redden not from embarrassment but confusion and rising anger. Marcus, I'm not certain what you're attempting. What I'm attempting. Marcus interrupted, his voice gaining volume to ensure nearby tables heard clearly, is saving you from additional embarrassment. You're 54 years old, Sandra. Don't. You think it's time to accept reality? To step aside for actresses who can actually generate revenue without nostalgia marketing. Each word struck like physical blows. This wasn't professional critique or honest industry discussion, this was calculated, Cruelty designed to destroy someone's confidence publicly before peers, producers, and executives who could determine career futures. The statistics don't lie. Marcus continued, circling closer like a predator discovering wounded prey. Audiences demand fresh faces, not has-beens desperately clinging to former glory. You're becoming a liability to every project you touch. The young filmmakers around Sandra looked away uncomfortably, their previous admiration suddenly complicated by this public challenge to her worth. Nobody dared intervene. Marcus Wellington possessed the power to destroy careers with a single phone call, and everyone present understood this. Sandra's hands trembled slightly as she struggled maintaining composure. Marcus, I don't understand why you feel the need to. I feel the need. Marcus cut her off sharply, voice dripping with condescension, because someone must tell you the truth. Everyone else is too courteous to say it. Your time is ended. Sandra, you can continue pretending you're still a leading lady, but everyone here knows you're yesterday's news, desperately attempting to stay relevant. At this moment, Sandra realized she wasn't just being criticized, she was being systematically humiliated by one of Hollywood's most powerful men before colleagues who could make or break her future projects. Tears formed in her eyes, but she fought desperately not to let them fall. She wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction of witnessing her complete public breakdown. The silence surrounding them was deafening. Mobile phones discreetly captured every second of the humiliation. Within hours, this would spread across every gossip site, every entertainment blog, every social media platform covering Hollywood drama. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that somehow carried to everyone nearby. Face it, Sandra, you're nothing more than a relic trying to compete with women half your age. It's pathetic, really. Sandra opened her mouth to formulate some response, but at that precise moment, a familiar voice cut through the tension like lightning splitting darkness. That's an interesting perspective, Marcus. As Sandra stands there fighting back tears, while struggling to maintain dignity before Hollywood's elite, that calm, unmistakable voice changes everything instantly. Keanu Reeves steps forward with quiet authority, and the entire room seems to hold its breath. Marcus's cruel smirk wavers for just a fraction before returning full force. He has absolutely no idea that he just made the biggest miscalculation of his career. What Keanu says next will not only defend Sandra, it will expose the toxic masculinity Marcus represents and begin a reckoning that will echo through Hollywood. For years, Keanu Reeves emerged from the crowd like a shadow taking form, his movement fluid yet purposeful. There was no haste in his approach, only quiet determination that made the entire ballroom freeze in collective anticipation. His presence immediately transformed the room's energy from uncomfortable spectacle to something far more electric and charged. Marcus turned, and for a fraction of a second, his cruel expression wavered before quickly hardening into defensive aggression. He straightened his shoulders like a bull preparing to charge, clearly not recognizing the gravity of the situation he had created by attacking Sandra so publicly. Keanu Reeves, Marcus said, his voice carrying false camaraderie that barely concealed underlying hostility. The saint of Hollywood graces us with his presence. I was just having a frank conversation with Sandra about market realities. Keanu stopped just a few meters from Marcus, his hands relaxed at his sides. But his eyes, those dark, expressive eyes that had captivated audiences for decades, carried an intensity that made several people instinctively step back. Frank. Keanu repeated the word slowly, as if examining it for hidden meanings and finding it contaminated. That's an interesting way to describe public humiliation, Marcus. Especially coming from someone who mistakes cruelty for honesty. The atmosphere in the salon changed instantaneously. It was as if someone had flipped an electrical switch, charging the air with possibility and danger. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People moved closer discreetly, sensing they were about to witness something historic, something that would be discussed for years. Marcus laughed. But there was a forced note in his voice, a slight edge that betrayed his growing irritation. Keanu, you always were too sensitive for this business. Perhaps you should stick to your action movies instead of inserting yourself in industry discussions that don't concern you. Don't concern me? Keanu took a step forward, and his voice, though still controlled, carried a weight that made the air feel thicker, more charged with impending confrontation. When someone I respect is being publicly degraded by someone who confuses power with the right to destroy others, that concerns me deeply. Sandra watched the scene unfold in stunned silence, still processing how quickly the situation had transformed. The tears in her eyes were now from a completely different emotion, not humiliation, but gratitude and something approaching hope for justice. Marcus, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to escalate the confrontation. His voice gained a sharp, aggressive edge. "Listen here, Keanu, you may have this ridiculous reputation as Hollywood's nice guy, but that doesn't give you the right to lecture me. I've built an empire in this city. I decide which careers survive and which don't." "An empire?" Keanu tilted, his head slightly with that expression anyone who had ever watched his films would recognize, calm on the surface but storm building underneath. "Built on the destruction of how many careers, Marcus? How many talented people did you crush to feed your ego?" His words echoed through the ballroom like a judgment being pronounced. Everyone knew he had touched the very heart of the issue nobody dared address publicly. Marcus Wellington was feared precisely because his career was built on systematic destruction of anyone he perceived as weak or vulnerable. "You're talking about something you don't understand," Marcus retorted, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "This is a competitive business. Not everyone can be a star forever. Competitive, yes. Sadistically cruel, no." Keanu stepped closer, and now his presence completely dominated the space around them. "There's a difference between professional assessment and personal destruction. What you did here tonight was pure sadism, designed to feed your own sense of superiority." Marcus looked around, expecting support from his usual circle of enablers, but found only uncomfortable stares. Some people had begun to discreetly distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with whatever was happening between these two powerful forces. "Sandra Bullock," Keanu continued, turning slightly to include Sandra in the conversation while never losing his focus on Marcus, "is one of the most talented, professional, and respected actresses this industry has ever known. She's earned her place through decades of hard work and genuine talent, things that apparently you're incapable of recognizing or respecting." Marcus felt his authority being challenged in a way he'd never experienced. He had completely underestimated Keanu's power, not the financial or political power he was accustomed to wielding, but something far more dangerous, genuine moral influence backed by universal respect. "You're making a serious mistake, Reeves," Marcus said, and now there was a barely concealed threat in his voice. "I have connections throughout this industry, people who understand that sentiment doesn't run successful businesses. Cross me, and you'll find out just how quickly careers can end." It was at this moment that Keanu smiled, not a friendly smile, but something far more dangerous. A smile that promised consequences. Marcus hadn't considered yet. As Marcus realizes, he's just threatened one of Hollywood's most beloved figures in front of dozens of witnesses. Something fundamental shifts in the room around them. The power structure he spent years carefully constructing through intimidation begins to crumble. Keanu's smile holds secrets about Marcus's behavior that could destroy his empire, and he's just given him every reason to use them. What Marcus doesn't know is that Keanu has been quietly documenting his pattern of abuse for years, waiting for exactly this moment. The reckoning he never saw coming is about to begin. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Keanu simply observed Marcus with those dark eyes that had witnessed decades of Hollywood's hidden cruelties. His expression was unreadable, but anyone who knew him well could see the internal calculation happening behind his calm exterior, a careful weighing of justice against personal cost. Internally, Keanu was wrestling with competing impulses. Part of him, the part that had learned to navigate Hollywood's treacherous waters by avoiding unnecessary conflicts, whispered cautions. "Don't do this. Walk away. You know what he's capable of. You've seen what happens to people who challenge him." But there was another voice, deeper and more insistent, a voice that carried the weight of every injustice he'd witnessed but stayed silent about. It was the voice that had grown stronger through personal loss, through watching good people destroyed by systems of cruelty, through all the moments when silence felt like complicity. Not this time, he thought to himself. Some things are more important than self-preservation. Sandra, watching the silent tension playing across Keanu's face, felt a mixture of hope and terror. She knew exactly what Marcus was capable of. His reputation for destroying careers wasn't just industry legend. It was documented fact. And now, Keanu was placing himself directly in the crosshairs of one of Hollywood's most vindictive power brokers for her sake. "Keanu," Sandra whispered gently, touching his arm, "you don't have to do this. I can handle him." But Keanu shook his head almost imperceptibly, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face, which now showed a mixture of irritation and growing unease. The predator was beginning to sense that he might have cornered something more dangerous than he'd anticipated. The crowd around them had grown larger. Executives, producers, actors, all sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years. Cell phones were discreetly positioned to capture whatever was about to unfold. Security cameras recording every angle. Marcus, recognizing that he had an audience and feeling his control of the situation slipping, decided to make one final attempt to reassert dominance. "You know, Keanu, I actually respect your protective instincts. But this isn't some movie where the hero saves the day. This is business, and in business, hard truths need to be spoken." "Hard truths?" Keanu repeated slowly, tasting the words like someone examining spoiled food. He took another step forward and now was close enough that his voice, though low and controlled, could be heard clearly by everyone around. "You want to talk about hard truths, Marcus?" Inside, Keanu was making a decision that he knew would change everything. Over the years, he had gathered information about Marcus not through malicious investigation, but simply by being observant, by listening to stories that people shared in confidence, by witnessing behavior that revealed character. It was information he had kept private, hoping it would never be necessary to use. That hope had just died. "The hard truth," Keanu continued, his voice gaining a quality that made even the waitstaff stop what they were doing to listen, "is that you've built your career on the systematic destruction of people who couldn't fight back. The hard truth is that you mistake fear for respect and cruelty for strength." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Keanu raised a hand. The gesture was so naturally authoritative that Marcus instinctively fell silent, perhaps recognizing for the first time that he was facing someone who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated. "The hard truth is that you've confused having power with being powerful. And the hardest truth of all," Keanu paused, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable for everyone watching, "is that your reign of terror is about to end, as..." Those words hang in the air like a death sentence for his career. Marcus realizes he's not just facing an angry actor, he's facing someone who knows things. Dangerous things. Things that could end not just his career, but expose a pattern of abuse that he spent years carefully hiding. The confident smirk fades completely from his face as he understands that Keanu Reeves isn't just defending Sandra Bullock, he's declaring war on everything Marcus represents. And in Hollywood, when someone with Keanu's moral authority declares war, even the most powerful bullies should be very afraid. The moment of rupture arrived like thunder after lightning, inevitable, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Keanu had crossed the line from polite confrontation to dangerous revelation, and everyone in the ballroom could feel the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded a storm. Marcus Wellington, for the first time in his powerful career, felt something he'd long forgotten: genuine vulnerability. Not the calculated vulnerability he sometimes performed for sympathy, but real fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes their carefully constructed facade is about to be stripped away. "You don't know what you're talking about," Marcus managed to say, but his voice came out less steady than intended, betraying the growing panic beneath his aggressive exterior. Keanu tilted his head slightly, and that simple gesture carried more menace than any shout could have conveyed. "Don't I? Jennifer Walsh, does that name mean anything to you, Marcus?" The name hit the ballroom like a physical force. Several people gasped audibly. recognizing a reference that sent chills through anyone familiar with Hollywood's darker stories. Jennifer Walsh had been a rising actress whose career had mysteriously imploded 3 years ago. After she'd reportedly refused Marcus's mentorship offers, Marcus's face visibly paled, though he tried to maintain his aggressive stance. "I don't know what you're implying, but Michael Chun?" Keanu continued relentlessly. Each name delivered with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. Sofia Rodriguez, David Kim, Amanda Foster. Each name hung in the air like an accusation, a memorial to destroyed dreams. All promising talents, all systematically blacklisted after refusing to accommodate Marcus's particular management style. The crowd was completely transfixed, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Some recognized the names actors who had vanished from the industry, directors whose projects suddenly lost funding, writers whose scripts never made it past development. A pattern was emerging that painted Marcus not as a tough businessman, but as a predator. Sandra watched the revelation unfold, realizing that she was witnessing something much larger than her personal defense. Keanu was exposing a systematic pattern of abuse that had operated in plain sight, protected by fear and industry silence. "You kept files on all of this?" Marcus asked, and there was desperation creeping into his voice like a cornered animal. Realizing the trap was closing, Keanu's expression remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I kept my eyes open, Marcus. I listened when people needed someone to believe their stories. I remembered when everyone else chose to forget." It was at this moment that something fundamental changed in the ballroom. People weren't just watching a confrontation anymore, they were witnessing the birth of accountability. Keanu had given voice to something that everyone knew but nobody had dared to say publicly. "You want to talk about hard truths?" Keanu took another step forward, close enough now that Marcus could see the accumulated weight of years of witnessed injustices in his eyes. "The truth is that you're not a powerful executive, you're a workplace predator who's used fear and intimidation to destroy anyone who wouldn't submit to your control." Marcus looked around desperately, searching for allies among his usual supporters, but found only faces that watched him with growing horror and recognition. The Emperor's clothes were disappearing in real time. "Hollywood is changing, Marcus," Keanu continued, his voice now carrying the weight of prophecy. "The old system where men like you could destroy careers for personal satisfaction, that's ending. People are finding their voices, and when they unite," he paused, letting the words hang like a promise of justice. "Well, you're about to find out what happens to predators when their victims stop being afraid." Marcus attempted one final desperate gambit, falling back on the only tool he'd ever really mastered: threats. "You're committing career suicide, Reeves. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." But Keanu only smiled, a smile of absolute certainty that was somehow more terrifying than any threat. "Marcus, you still don't understand, do you? I'm not afraid of you. And when people stop being afraid of you," he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the room, "you discover that you never really had power at all. You just had fear. And fear only works until someone decides to stop running." It was at this moment that Marcus Wellington realized he had lost everything, not just an argument, not just face, but possibly his entire position in an industry. He terrorized for decades, yet as Marcus realizes the magnitude of his exposure, something even more powerful is happening around them. Other people in the room are stepping forward: actors, directors, crew members who have remained silent for too long about his systematic abuse. They found their courage through Keanu's example, and now they're ready to add their voices to the chorus of truth. The floodgates are about to open, and Marcus is standing directly in the path of a tsunami of testimony that will wash away his empire of fear forever. What happened next defied every prediction about how power worked in Hollywood. As if Keanu had broken some invisible spell that had kept an entire industry silent, people began to move. First one, then another, until a crowd formed around Sandra and Keanu, each person finding courage in the collective decision that silence was no longer acceptable. The first to speak was Robert Chun, a veteran cinematographer whom everyone respected for his decades of professional excellence. His voice carried the weight of too many years of witnessed abuse. "Keanu is right," he said, and his words echoed through the ballroom like the first crack in a dam. "Marcus, you destroyed my daughter's acting career because she wouldn't go to your private auditions at your hotel." Marcus spun toward Robert, his face cycling through rage, panic, and desperate calculation. "You can't prove any of that. These are just vindictive lies from people who couldn't make it in a competitive industry." But then Maria Santos, a respected script supervisor, stepped forward with quiet dignity. "They're not lies. You told me personally that my job security depended on how accommodating I was willing to be. When I reported you to HR, suddenly my contracts started drying up. One by one, like survivors finally emerging from hiding, more people began to speak. Years of suppressed testimony poured out, decades of silenced voices finally finding their courage. "You cornered me in my dressing room," said Elena Rodriguez, a young actress whose career had mysteriously stalled 2 years ago. "When I threatened to call security, you laughed and said security worked for you. You blacklisted me for 3 years," added Thomas Wright, a director whose projects had inexplicably lost funding. "All because I wouldn't cast your girlfriend in a role she wasn't qualified for." Sandra watched the scene unfold with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of cathartic relief. What had begun as her personal humiliation had transformed into something historic, a collective breaking of silence that was liberating people from years of fear and isolation. Keanu remained steady at the center of the growing storm, like a lighthouse anchoring boats in turbulent seas. His calm presence gave people permission to speak truths they'd carried in shame and silence. Marcus, realizing he was being surrounded by his own victims, attempted a final desperate maneuver. "You're all making a catastrophic mistake. I have evidence on every one of you: drug use, affairs, financial irregularities. Destroy me, and I'll take this entire room down with me." It was then that Keanu produced his phone, the recording app clearly visible on the screen. "Evidence? You mean like you just admitting to blackmail and extortion in front of 40 witnesses? The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized he had just incriminated himself in multiple felonies while being recorded by dozens of people. "But the most powerful evidence," Keanu continued, putting the phone away with deliberate calm, "isn't recordings or documents. It's standing right here around us. These are the people whose careers you tried to destroy, whose dreams you attempted to crush, whose silence you bought with fear." As if a dam had finally burst, more voices joined the chorus. Stories poured out that painted a picture of systematic abuse spanning decades, careers ended for refusing sexual advances, projects killed for not paying bribes, talented people driven from the industry for the crime of having integrity. "He made me choose between my dignity and my career," said Patricia Williams, a veteran actress whose star had mysteriously faded years ago. "I chose dignity and paid for it every day since. He told me that pretty girls who wanted to work should be grateful for attention from powerful men," whispered Sarah Kim, a young production assistant. "When I said no, suddenly every door in Hollywood was closed to me." Sandra stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, transformed by witnessing this collective act of courage. "This ends tonight, Marcus. Your reign of sexual intimidation, professional retaliation, and systematic abuse, it ends right here, right now." Keanu nodded, his presence anchoring the moment with unshakable moral authority. "You see, Marcus, you made the same mistake that all predators make. You thought that isolating people, making them feel alone and powerless, would keep them silent forever. But trauma shared is trauma halved, and courage shared is courage doubled." Marcus looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run from the collective testimony that was destroying his reputation in real time. His empire of fear was crumbling, dismantled not by violence or legal action, but by something far more powerful, truth spoken by people who had finally found their voices. "This isn't over," Marcus said, his voice now shrill with desperation. "I'll find a way to destroy all of you. You don't know who you're dealing with." Keanu stepped forward one final time, his voice carrying absolute finality. Marcus, we know exactly who we're dealing with, a sad, insecure man who confused fear with respect and cruelty with power. Your threats have no weight here anymore. Look around, see how many people you've hurt? See how they're not afraid of you anymore? That's your real legacy. Security approached to escort Marcus out as he continued making increasingly desperate threats, but his words fell on deaf ears. A man who had once commanded absolute fear through intimidation had become irrelevant in the span of a single conversation. As Marcus is led away, still screaming threats that carry no weight. Everyone in the room understands they've witnessed something historic, not just the fall of a Hollywood predator, but the birth of a new era where courage is contagious, where truth has power, and where sometimes the most important revolution begins with one person's refusal to watch injustice happen in silence. The old system of fear and intimidation is dying, and something better is being born in its place. The Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom remained electrically charged long after Marcus's humiliating departure. People stood in small groups, still processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed, not just the exposure of one predator, but the collective breaking of silence that had protected systematic abuse for decades. Sandra Bullock found herself at the center of an impromptu support network, surrounded by colleagues and strangers alike, who approached to share their own stories and express gratitude for the courage that had been displayed. But her eyes repeatedly sought out Keanu, who stood quietly observing the ripple effects of the evening's events with characteristic humility. "Keanu," she approached him, her voice thick with emotion she could barely contain. "What you did tonight, you didn't just defend me, you gave all these people their voices back?" "What happened tonight," Keanu replied gently, "was people finding the courage they already had. Sometimes we just need someone to take the first step, to show that speaking truth to power is possible." But both understood the magnitude of what had occurred. In an industry built on fear and silence, what Keanu had done was revolutionary. He had demonstrated that moral courage could triumph over institutional power. Within hours, footage from the confrontation spread across every social media platform. But this time, the response transcended typical Hollywood gossip. Survivors of workplace abuse from every industry began sharing their stories, using hashtags that turned the evening's events into a broader movement for accountability. The entertainment industry was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power structures that had protected predators for generations. Studio executives quietly began reviewing their own policies and behavior, recognizing that the old system of intimidation and silence was no longer sustainable. Marcus Wellington disappeared from public life as more victims came forward with similar stories. His production company immediately severed ties, and criminal investigations were launched into multiple allegations of sexual harassment, extortion, and racketeering. Keanu returned to his projects with renewed purpose, using his platform to advocate for industry-wide reforms that would protect vulnerable workers. He established a confidential reporting system for abuse and funded legal support for victims seeking justice. Sandra's career experienced an unexpected renaissance as the story spread, but more importantly, she became a powerful advocate for creating safer workspaces and entertainment. The humiliation Marcus had intended to inflict had instead transformed her into a symbol of resilience and the importance of speaking truth. The empty space where Marcus's influence had existed was filled with something unprecedented, a growing culture of accountability, respect, and genuine collaboration that proved entertainment could be both profitable and ethical. Sometimes, the most powerful victory is refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. Sometimes one person's moral courage can ignite a fire that burns away decades of corruption and fear. The revolution had begun with a simple refusal to stay silent, proving that dignity and truth will always triumph over intimidation when backed by collective courage.